Good morning, boys and girls. How are you? How are my wonderful third graders? I hope everything's going well. I hope you're working hard. And I really hope you're enjoying Winn Dixie. It's kind of fun, isn't it? How many of you have read ahead? Has anybody read ahead? It's okay if you have, but just remember my rules. When we get here, I still want you to follow along when I read, and I don't want you to tell anybody what's happened, okay? Because that's the fun of reading. We get to be surprised and sometimes scared, sometimes amused, sometimes sad about what's happened. But don't take that away from anybody. Let them find out for themselves. Okay, we've got a few vocab words. I'm in my dining room today. I decided to go ahead and do it here instead of popping back to school. So it's a little bit different. I'm not as comfortable. I'd rather be in my classroom, but I wanted to go ahead and get it done. Okay, so we've got memorial, which is a remembrance of somebody. If you have a memorial, you're remembering somebody somehow, okay? Congregation, that's you sit in the congregation at church. When you're out in the pews, you're sitting in the congregation. You're part of the church. Sermon, that I feel like we've had this word before. Did we already do this one? I don't know. It's when you give the preacher in the story gives his homily, like Father Scott gives his homily. I think we've had that before. But when he talks to us and gives us his words of wisdom. And then we have pew, that's where you sit in church. And the word properly, meaning the correct way of doing something. Okay, so we'll see all those words as we're reading. We're going to read two chapters today, chapters 5 and 6. So we're going to start with chapter 5. Now it's been a while. It's been a real while since I have read this. It's been a good week. So we know, just to think back over what's happened, Opal, way back at the beginning of the story of the book, Opal was in a grocery store and saw a dog running around like a crazy thing, and realized that the dog was going to be sent to the pound, and she didn't want that to happen. So she acted like the dog was hers and said, "Come here, Winn Dixie," and the dog trotted right on over to Opal just like he was hers. And so she adopted Winn Dixie, took him home, was a little worried about what her daddy, the preacher, would say about Winn Dixie, the dog. She didn't know if he would care for having a dog there, but Winn Dixie won the preacher's heart over. Remember how it told us Winn Dixie would smile, like he looked up at the preacher and smiled. So that's funny to picture, to think about the dog smiling. But he won the heart of the preacher. And so he said, all right, Winn Dixie can stay as long as he behaves, which he pretty much has done. Remember, they live in an all-adult trailer park, meaning that there's not really kids there. But they made an exception for Opal because she was a preacher's daughter. And they thought, well, surely she'll be well behaved. She's a preacher's daughter. And so they allowed her, but maybe a little concerned with Winn Dixie, causing a ruckus in a all-adult trailer park that's normally kind of calm. So we're going to see what happens. If anything comes of that, we'll see. So the way the story is just going to kind of go on with the antics that Winn Dixie and Opal tend to get into, okay? So we're going to go to chapter 5. It's on page 31. I'll give you just a second to get there. Just get comfy and take your shoes off. Let me ask you this. Did you brush your teeth this morning? I hope I hope. Now listen, just because you don't have to get out and go to school doesn't mean you can throw all your hygiene by the wayside. You all brush your teeth, wash your face, get yourself situated. If you're having trouble getting into school mode, you might need to get dressed. You might have to put on your uniform. No, you don't have to do that. But just get yourself in the school frame of mind, okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 5. Winn Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone. We found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he pulled all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying him up outside with a rope when we left. That didn't work either. Winn Dixie howled until Samuel, Mrs. Detweller's dog, started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in an all-adult trailer park do not like to hear. He just doesn't want to be left alone, I told the preacher. That's all. Let's take him with us. I could understand the way Winn Dixie felt. getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere we went, we took Winn Dixie, even to church. Can you imagine taking a dog to church? The Open Arms Baptist Church in Naomi isn't a regular looking church. The building used to be a Pick It Quick store, and when you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is the Pick It Quick motto. It's written on the floor in little tiny red tiles that make great big letters that say, pick, 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 quick, quick, quick. The preacher tried painting over those tiles, but the letters won't stay covered up, and so the preacher has just given up and let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms that is different from other churches is there aren't any pews. People bring in their own fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and so sometimes it looks more like the congregation is watching a parade or sitting at a barbecue instead of being at church. It's kind of a strange church, and I thought Winn Dixie would fit right in. Now, are you picturing that? So it's in an old Pick It Quick store, which is kind of like a Thornton's gas station little convenience store that they have there. And people bring their lawn chairs, like if they're at a soccer game or something, that's what they sit on. So that's their church. Now, God doesn't care. You can be at church wherever you want and pray wherever you want. God doesn't care. But it's a little bit out of the normal, isn't it? Can you imagine if we had a bunch of lawn chairs set up in our church at Lourdes? That'd be silly, wouldn't it? But the first time we brought Winn Dixie to the Open Arms, the preacher tied him outside the front door. Why did we bring him all the way here just to tie him up? I asked the preacher. Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal, the preacher said. That's why. He tied Winn Dixie up to a tree, and I said how there was lots of shade for him, and then it ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started, and there was some singing and some sharing and some praying, and then the preacher started preaching. And he wasn't but 2 or 3 words into his sermon when there was a terrible howl coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. "Arroo!" said Winn Dixie. "Please," said the preacher. "Arroo!" said Winn Dixie back. "Friends," said the preacher. "Arroo!" wailed Winn Dixie. Everyone turned in their lawn chairs and fold-up chairs and looked at one another. "Opal," said the preacher. "Ow!" said Winn Dixie. "Yes, sir," I said. "Go get that dog," he yelled. "Yes, sir," I yelled back. I went outside and I untied Winn Dixie and brought him inside, and he sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher, and the preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn Dixie had that effect on him. Can you see Winn Dixie smiling up at the preacher? And so the preacher started in preaching again. Winn Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words, and everything would have been all right except that a mouse ran across the floor. Ugh. The Open Arms had mice. They were there from when it was a Pick It Quick, and there were lots of good things to eat in the building. And when the Pick It Quick became the Open Arms Baptist Church in Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did, because the truth is he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, even a mouse. Well, Winn Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute everything was quiet and serious, and the preacher was going on and on and on, and the next minute Winn Dixie looked like a furry bullet shooting across the building chasing that mouse. He was barking and his feet were skidding all over the polished Pick It Quick floors, and people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn Dixie actually caught the mouse. "I have never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse," said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting next to me. "He's a special dog," I told her. "Well, I imagine so," she said back. Winn Dixie stood up there in front of the whole church, wagging his tail and holding the mouse real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight but not squishing him. "I believe that mutt has got some retriever in him," said somebody behind me. "That's a hunting dog." Winn Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet. And when the mouse tried to get away, Winn Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. Then he smiled up at the preacher. He showed him all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn Dixie. He looked at me. He rubbed his nose. Got real quiet in the picket quick. "Let us pray," the preacher finally said, "for this mouse." And everybody started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail and walked and threw it out the front door of the picket quick, and everybody applauded again. Then he came back and we all prayed together. I prayed for my mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe I could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi because I didn't know that many kids, only the ones from church. And there weren't that many kids at the open arms, just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, two brothers who weren't twins but looked like they were. And Amanda Wilkinson, whose face was always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad. And Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old and still mostly a baby. And none of them wanted to be my friend anyway because they probably thought I'd tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong, and then they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn Dixie. And finally I prayed for the mouse. Like the preacher suggested, I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he went flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church in Naomi. I prayed that he landed on a nice soft patch of grass. Now, can you picture Winn Dixie? Any of you know me, know that mice are like my least favorite thing in the whole wide world. They freak me out. I don't know why, but mice. But picturing Winn Dixie holding that mouse in his mouth and not squishing it, I mean, I don't like the thought of killing anything, even an icky old mouse, so I'm kind of glad that Winn Dixie was able to hold it in his mouth and not squish it. But just picturing that is so funny. And then picturing Winn Dixie smiling up at the preacher, and you know the preacher is trying to be strict, but he just can't help but laugh and smile at Winn Dixie. Winn Dixie has that effect on people. We'll find. All right. So Opal's got some things on her mind. Always on her mind is her mama that left. Remember, we said when she was just 3 years old, and Opal misses her terribly and just wishes that she were able to know her. But Opal's now 10 and hasn't seen her mama in years and doesn't really remember her at all. So that weighs on her mind. But you notice at the end of this chapter, there's another thing it said was bothering her. Do you remember what that was? What's really weighing on Opal? It's a problem she has. Can you think of what that is? She doesn't feel like she has any friends. They've moved to Naomi following the preacher's job. She's 10 years old, doesn't really know anybody. She has Winn Dixie, and she's very thankful for that. Thank goodness for Winn Dixie. Any of you that have a dog or any kind of pet know that they can be very comforting to us. You can talk to them. They're very good listeners, aren't they? All pets are. But Opal is feeling very lonely because she doesn't really have any friends here in Naomi. So she's just, kind of bummed out. Happy to have Winn Dixie, but still sad she doesn't have people friends. All right, let's go on and read chapter 6. So we're on page 40. Go ahead and read this one, and then we'll be stopping for the day. I spent a whole lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big, fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books, and Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She is very small, very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. Okay, so they give a good description of Miss Franny. Very small woman. She's old. Let's see, very small, short gray hair. And notice Opal says the first friend I made in Naomi. So Miss Franny Block, an older person, but that's her first friend. It all started with Winn Dixie not liking it when I went in. Oh, you know what? Something I forgot to tell you all. This chapter 6, is actually when we come back together and you're in the 4th grade, This is the very first story in the first grade book. You know how, not the first grade book, the first story in the fourth grade book. You know how sometimes they take chapters from books? Well, this is the first one. So it'll be kind of fun, a fun way for us to get back together when you're big bad fourth graders. And this will be the first one, but this is the chapter that's in there, okay? All right. It all started with Winn Dixie not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there selecting my books. And he was okay, as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. Miss Franny, I said, are you all right? A bear, she said. A bear? I asked. He's come back, she said. He has? I asked. Where is he? Out there, she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn Dixie standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. Miss Franny Block, I said, that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn Dixie. Are you positive? She asked. Yes, ma'am, I told her. I'm positive. He's my dog. I would know him anywhere. Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. Come on, I said, let me help you up. It's okay. I stuck my hand out and Miss Franny took hold of it and I pulled her up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady mistaking a dog for a bear, but that she had had a bad experience with a bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never had quite gotten over it. When did that happen? I asked her. Well, said Miss Franny, it's a very long story. Well, that's okay, I told her. I'm like my mama, and that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me. Well, I don't know, said Miss Franny. Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. He'll be good, I told her. He's a dog who goes to church. And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn Dixie, and he came in and lay down with a humph and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, he most certainly is a large dog. Now, I get the feeling Miss Franny is not a dog person. You know how some people really like dogs and other people are kind of like, rah. I don't think she really cares for dogs too much. Yes, ma'am, I told her, he has a large heart too. Well, Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn Dixie a pat on the head, and Winn Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffled his nose on her old lady feet. Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell this story properly. So Opal feels like she's beginning to make her first friend. They're forming a connection, Opal and Miss Franny Block are. And notice Opal just kind of wiggles Winn Dixie into the library. I think Miss Franny would have said, oh, no dogs in the library. Well, I mean, she kind of did. But Opal was like, it's all right, he'll be fine. And she just kind of brought him on in. And he sat right down at Miss Franny's feet, not doing any harm at all, not bothering her, but wiggling his way into Miss Franny's heart. So we are going to stop there with Chapter 6. Now, Chapter 7... as you can imagine, I bet you've already made your predictions because you guys are so smart and think that way. You just kind of naturally do that, don't you? But Chapter 7 will be, actually, I think it's chapter, I don't know, maybe it's 6 and 7 that are in the 4th grade book. I can't remember if it's both of them or just Chapter 7. But anyway, both or one of them will be in the 4th grade book when you all come back next year. That'll be the first story we read. But anyway, so Chapter 7, as you can imagine, Miss Franny tells us, let's get ready, I'm going to tell you this story. So Chapter 7 obviously will be this story, which if you remember, she said is a long story, and it's about a bear. So we're going to find that out when we come together again, okay? So next time we'll be reading chapters 7 and 8 together. So today, what you're going to do, you're going to write your summaries for chapter 5 and 6, which I forgot to put on a piece of paper, and I apologize. But just do that as you have been, where you get a piece of paper, and you'll write chapters, do them together. You can do 5 and 6 together. So chapters 5 and 6 together, and leave room for your picture, and just write your summary at the bottom. This one, because it's 2 chapters, might take a few more sentences than you had before. But just make sure it's nice and neat. And remember, I said you don't have to turn those in until the very end of the book. I'll be collecting them somehow. I want you to be sure you hang on to them, okay? Because there might be some activities coming up. I'm not sure how all this is going to play out, like exactly when we're going to be coming back together, if we're able to do that. I just don't know. So I'm kind of waiting to get direction in that area, and I'm not exactly sure of the activities we'll be doing. But you're going to need those summaries, whether you're at home, whether you're at school, wherever. You're going to need to refer back to those. So don't lose them. If you send me a picture of them, if some of you have already done that, I still want you to keep those, okay? Because it'll really help you to be able to look back on them with some of the things we're going to do in the future. Get a folder and just keep them in a little folder, all nice and neat, in order. And really, before we read, like tomorrow, chapter 7 and 8, it would be really smart. A really good reader would go back and look at those chapter summaries just to refresh your mind, especially if it's been like over a weekend or something before we've read something together. Okay? All right, I guess that's it. Okay, so until we meet again, actually tomorrow, if you're sticking with the schedule, today is Tuesday, April 14th, and tomorrow is our quiet Wednesday, our quiet work day. So if you choose to read ahead, that's absolutely fine, but just remember, don't tell anybody what happens, okay? Keep that a secret. All right, be sweet. I know you are, you precious little things. Bye.